that guilt is the initial, fuck, I feel bad for what I did. Right? And why do we feel bad? Because it's out of alignment with the truth of who we are, because it's out of alignment with our character, because it's out of alignment with our values. We know we shouldn't have done that thing. And maybe we didn't even realize we were doing it until after we did it. And it's like, oh shit, that's why we feel guilt. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Shame is the story you tell yourself about who you are. And that's the piece. It's about who you are. So shame becomes a part of your identity.
All right, here we are. Welcome back to another episode of the Ignite the King podcast. I'm Dr. Michael Diamond.
And G. Russell Reynolds.
Good to see you, brother. How are you today?
You too, man. I am well. You're filming remote.
I am. You love my beautiful background here in the big island of Kona, Hawaii.
Your beautiful monotone, nondescript background.
Well, what people don't realize is behind this curtain is one of the most picturesque, beautiful scenes of the Pacific Ocean at Magic Sands here. So I don't know what it'll do to the light, but maybe at the end we'll give you a little shot of the ocean there.
There you go. There you go. That would be nice.
Well, I love that. I love that we can record this remote, and I know this is today's topic. It was a real powerful discussion within our group that you led this last week, and it felt it was compelling enough for us to deep dive it here for the audience, because we know a lot of men are probably feeling this, a lot of people in general, and I'll just throw it out there, resentment and the pieces that go with holding on to energy, holding on to stories, holding on to things that have happened to us or things that we've done, and the shame and guilt that gets associated with that. That's what we're going to be talking about and deep diving into today, and its relevance in how a man can feel free and clear in how he experiences his life. So that's going to be our topic today. Curious your initial thoughts on that, and then we're going to take a deep dive here.
Yeah, it's, I was motivated to share that in the group when I led the call last week. And I was reading a book called Open Your Mind to Prosperity by Catherine Ponder. Great book. Nothing new under the sun. But one of the topics in there is forgiveness is necessary for prosperity. And the realization that resentment is blocking your riches, it's blocking your gold, it's blocking all the good in your life. And of course, with that, the question comes up of who do you need to forgive? I think for myself, we start thinking of the big one, like who's the big person I have to forgive? Right. And I'm like, no. No. Who are the little ones? What about them little bitty ones that you just sweep under the rug and don't take any notice of? What about the resentments that you're holding towards the guy who cut you off in traffic, towards your woman for what she said last night or this morning, or towards yourself for not taking the trash out, or for the trash man for coming 15 minutes early, or for your dog for pissing on the carpet, whatever it may be. All these little resentments add up, and we're carrying them in our subconscious mind, and they start weighing us down. And God, the universe, source, whatever we want to call it, can't operate smoothly and effectively in a cluttered space. So if our mind is all cluttered up with resentments, right? And we've said before, Michael, that gratitude is the language of God. Right. So how can you be resentful and grateful at the same time? You can't.
Well, you can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it just became really, top of mind for me, that it's like, who do you need to forgive? How many of these little effing resentments am I carrying on a daily basis that I don't pay any mind to? It's like, and I thought about it, I'm like, oh, my mom, my nephew, my sister, myself, my woman, my dog, like the guy who cut me off in traffic, the guy at the gym who will not stop texting when I'm waiting for the machine, whatever it may be.
I love that guy.
Oh, I've been less than gracious before. I'm like, yo, when you're done supersetting your thumbs, how many sets do you got left? And all those resentments add up.
Yeah. There's three, I think, big topics there. I want to pause on for a second because, it's easy to. kind of go down a rabbit hole right away and want to just kind of break it down a little bit. There's the big resentments, right? Like maybe the major relationships in our lives, right? And then, like you said, there's the small resentments. There's the little things, the guy texting at the machine or cutting you off, where it really doesn't make a difference, but yet I know I can let those little things build up, right? Which are probably the worst kind, right? And then, like you said, ourselves, right? Resentment around ourselves. So there's 3 areas that we really need to break down and look at. It's like the big ones, because, you know, whether like in our intimate relationship, maybe there's some forgiveness there. Maybe there was infidelity. Maybe there was cheating or lying or just not paying attention or being present or whatever,
or just not
way
getting
it
your
shows
needs
up.
met.
Whatever way it shows up in the relationship, and then resenting that person, and then those are big ones, right? And, you know, maybe it's in work where you have a boss or maybe a customer or whatever the relationship is, where you sort of have to put up with this person or company or entity, but yet you have feelings around it, right? So these are big ones. And then, like you said, the small ones, the little things, the day-to-day, having to interact in the store, cashiers, banks, you name it. And we allow our energy going in to affect that. Right. And then ultimately, like all the work we talk about in men's work, it's like we have to put the mirror up and look at ourselves. And ultimately, it is a forgiveness of self. And so I'd like us to expand on those. But there's also one other thing you said that was really powerful, is when we're filled up with that, we don't allow the prosperity and abundance in. Right. It's almost like the docking sites. And, you know, I, as a doctor, I always like to get down to physiology. It's almost like literally the docking sites on the cells for prosperity are already those parking spots are already taken up with resentment. And actually, there was some really interesting studies, and we don't have to get too into it right now, but that were done where they looked at petri dishes of cells, and they would put the cold virus in, and they were cells that were infused with what they called wellness or positive emotions. And the emotions that were positive actually docked on the cells first, and didn't allow the cold virus to dock on the cells. And what this ultimately they translated to is that when you're in a healthy, well state, even if you're exposed to different viruses or things that are around you, there's no place for it to go, because you're already exuding a high level of health, of well-being, of wellness, right? Where the opposite is also true. If we're just built up with resentment, you could try to do all the healthy things and take the right supplements and drink the right amount of things or whatever, but they're already blocked up with this resentment, with this other things that are going on, that we don't actually get to experience the prosperity, the abundance, all the things that could be docking to that. So I think that's an important theme for us to hit on, and how to actually move that energy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just jump on that one right now. You'd mentioned that, I mean, we've talked about how not just resentment, but we have to do the work. We have to do our internal work. We have to do, you know, the processes that we do in Ignite the King, because if you don't process your emotion, right? And we've talked about emotion, energy, emotion, like
totally.
If you don't deal with it, if you don't process that emotion, your body has to process it for you. That will inevitably result in disease or disability or breakdown in some way, shape, or form. And that's what you're talking about with that resentment and stuff like that. And that ties into guilt and shame, which I know you have a piece that you want to share on that, but I immediately think of my own father. And I love him, and he's passed away, and he passed of cancer. And I am sure that a large part of that cancer was the guilt and shame he felt for not being there for us when we were children. My parents divorced when I was 3. So,
Sure.
You know, his internal dialogue of guilt and shame, I have no doubt that was a big part of his illness.
Yeah. So since you mentioned it, there are a couple things, but let's talk about the guilt and shame for a moment. Because often those words get thrown together, right? They get coupled together. And, you know, one of the intentions of this podcast is to take these things in the men's personal growth space and to break it down, make it simple, make it actionable, make it applicable to your life. So it's not some just psychobabble bullshit. We're actually getting down. And that's not my quote. I have a client that's what he says when we get into anything metaphysical.
Right. I just need to
but there is
my chakras with my astrology and take a kombucha enema. Really? Is that what you need? Really?
I love kombucha. I'm sorry. Anyway,
not as an enema.
Not as an enema. So guilt, just to be very clear, is the feeling of feeling bad for an action, for something that you did. Right? I feel guilty that I hurt that person. I feel guilty that I cut that person off in traffic, or whatever the ... is. Feeling bad for the action, right? The behavior. I feel bad that I did that. Okay. Shame is now a story. Shame is what you tell yourself about yourself because of those things that you did, because of what you feel guilty for. Right. So it's almost like guilt is the short acting piece and shame is the long acting piece, right? Like, shame on you, right? Like, think about that word, the phrase that we say, shame on you.
What a horrible thing to say.
You see in restaurants or places, the wall of shame, right? People that have done them wrong and they immortalize them for writing a bad check or whatever. I mean, maybe they don't do that anymore, but right, they're or like news outlets used to have their wall of shame, right? Do investigative reports or whatever. And it's like, but we as a culture will shame people for whatever they did, right? And we have no backstory. We have no understanding of where that person is coming from. Something I know teach a lot in our group is you don't know what other people are going through. You don't know what people are experiencing, right? So we have to be honoring of that because it's easy to push that on other people. But again, ultimately, and what I want to hear you speak about as well is how we take that mirror and look at ourselves relative to guilt and to shame.
Yeah, and on that guilt and shame piece, that's a powerful piece that you mentioned, that guilt is the initial, I feel bad for what I did. Right? And why do we feel bad? Because it's out of alignment with the truth of who we are, because it's out of alignment with our character, because it's out of alignment with our values. We know we shouldn't have done that thing. And maybe we didn't even realize we were doing it until after we did it. And it's like, oh shit, that's why we feel guilt. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Shame is the story you tell yourself about who you are. And that's the piece. It's about who you are. So shame becomes a part of your identity, right? Guilt is I did a bad thing. Shame is I am a bad person. That's toxic. That's destructive. And it's a lie. It's not true. Maybe there's some people, Jeffrey Dahmer has some strange dietary habits, like he could possibly be a bad person. But you know what I'm saying? For most of us, the story you're telling yourself, which is your attempt to do penance for the bad thing that you did to try to get back in the good graces of God, or get back in the good graces of your own consciousness or conscience, it's not effective. It just perpetuates the suffering.
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge piece, and that's where it really starts to, again, we've said that be very, very careful what you put behind those words, right?
Yeah. It's interesting because, as you're talking, I'm like, there's sometimes when we're doing this podcast where I'm like, man, are we just going to say the same thing over and over again? And I'm like, there's just a core piece of when we understand that what we tell ourselves over and over again is who we become, that it takes so much to, in a way, turn that ship around for men. Yeah. I think you mentioned on the last podcast where it's like, hey, if you grew up with your dad saying you're great, you can do everything you want to do. It's like, well, good for you, right? Because a lot of men haven't received that. And it's like, as simple as a statement as that is, it is important to recognize like the things that we are consistently telling ourselves is who we become. Interesting, the word, I always love to look at the words themselves, right? We talk about resentment. So it's like, okay, means you're just doing it over and over again. Resentment or sentiment, it's your sentiment. Like, how do you feel about something? So resentment is like essentially you're playing out over and over again the same thoughts, feelings, emotions around something that happened in your life or happened to you. Right. You have resentment because you're just playing the story over and over again. And as far as the nervous system goes, you don't even, now this doesn't mean that bad things haven't happened to people, but we don't remember things really the way that they happened. We don't.
We remember, and every time we remember
right. And every time we remember something, we're actually remembering the last time we remembered it. So almost like the game of telephone, the more we try to remember something, the more skewed that actual memory becomes.
Right.
And then also the way the nervous system works is we only really remember 3-second bites of information at a time. So it's almost like little vignettes or snapshots of a memory. You don't remember the whole experience, every nuance, right? And at the same time, if there were other people involved, they might remember it a little differently than you.
Probably so.
Yeah. It's interesting. So I'm on a family trip while I'm in Hawaii. My wife's from Hawaii, and there's a lot of history in that family without getting into it. But my wife will remember something that happened to them, and we're in her homeland. Like tomorrow we're going up, or today, to the farm that her dad built their house 50 years ago by hand, right? Like same house she grew up in. There's a lot of memories, right? There's a lot just embedded in the walls, so to speak. And it's like she'll remember something, and then her mom or sister will remember that same thing, but very, very different. Right. It's like, wow, that's your story about how that went down, right? So it's just interesting to see that, like, whose story is it anyway? What's actually true here? Right. Or what are you claiming from that experience, and what are you holding on to or having resentment toward, right? And it's like, oh, fuck, I have to look at that differently now. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and forgiveness is not some pious act of saying you're sorry when you don't mean it. Forgiveness is just setting yourself free. Just setting yourself free. And resentment, like the saying goes about anger, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. Resentment is no different. It's the same thing. Resentment is just low-grade anger, which I don't know how that became a term, low-grade anger. Like,
yeah, we need to You're scratch angry. That one.
It's angry. Yeah.
Low-grade just meaning it's all the time.
Yeah, right. Yeah, low-grade means I'm running this in the background 24/7. That's not a healthy practice.
Not how we were designed as humans, right?
So hanging on to resentment is drinking poison, waiting for the other person to die. And if we don't even know that we're holding on to it, and again, I think about in the gym, right? Like it's like, okay, that was a good lift. It was hard. I can add a 10-pound plate to the bar. 10 pound, like no big deal. 10 pound on each side. I got that. That's easy. Now I had 5 of them on each side. Oh, wait, that adds up. And I had a couple 2.5s, and then I had a 5, and I had nickel and dime. It's all going to add up and get real effing heavy real fast. So the resentments are the same thing. How much of that shit are you dragging around on a daily basis that is occupying your mind that would otherwise be focused on creating the life that you desire, the life that you really want, the life that you would really love?
Yeah. I would love for you to dive a little bit more into the forgiveness piece, because I think this will be essentially part of the actionables, right? But just to speak to how, because man, we really want to call you out for the things, and these are all things that we did. We just have learned to evolve with them, or still do to a point. Because what we have seen is many men will shoulder the burden, will take things on, will almost look at these things that happen in life as a badge of honor. That I can shoulder this. There's pride in pain, and not the good kind of pain. But again, I think that's where things stack up, build up, and then come out like almost like a fire hose, right? Where it's like men are like, I'm fine, and we know what fine means, but yet internally there's all these things going on. Men have the same emotions that everyone else has, but we just haven't learned as men to process them, which allows them to build up, to build resentment, and then to come out in a negative way where then we feel guilt about what we did or said, which causes shame, right? And it's just like this dangerous cycle that kind of goes on and on. So I think the forgiveness piece helps to actually move through that energy, right? And just to say forgiveness, for is beforehand, and to give, right? So you're giving that before it actually has come back to you, right? You have to sort of be willing to go first, is how I see forgiveness, right? Sometimes we're waiting for the other person to apologize for what we did, when it's like, no, we need to forgive. I knew I'd hit on it at some point here, but it's like we have to be willing to go first, right? And then that usually comes. So I see that Goy smile, so I'll let you jump in.
I just laugh at that one, and before I talk, so put a pin in waiting for the other person to apologize first. But I want to create a distinction in what you said. For men to shoulder the burden, for men to push through the pain, that's a inherently masculine quality. Good. Keep doing that. Holding resentment about doing so, that's the problem. So I want to create the distinction. We're not saying don't do that. We're not saying puss out or just go, I don't want to. Like, no, you're a man. We do push through the pain. We do, sisu, right? That determination against all odds. And can you still do so with an open heart? Oh, there's the trick.
Yeah.
Right. Because if you're holding resentment about all of the things that you have agreed to do as a man, because you've said, hey, I want to be the man. I want to take on the mantle of masculinity. So I'm going to do these things. Great. Fucking do them. But if you're holding resentment about it because you haven't been acknowledged enough, or because somebody didn't show up exactly the way you wanted them to, or because somebody said something that you interpreted maybe different than the way they meant it. If you're holding all those resentments, that will be your undoing.
It never happens. Sorry, my sarcasm did not come through on the podcast there.
Yeah. Yeah. The reason I laughed when you said waiting for the other person to apologize, one of my family members recently called me about one of my other family members. Said, did you hear the latest thing they did? And I said, no, but I'm sure I'm about to.
Hold on. How many of you out there have gotten those phone calls?
Hold on, let me get my popcorn.
How many of you have made those phone calls?
Yeah, let me get my popcorn. And it's like, da 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 da. And I just started laughing. I said, the only thing that I'm wondering is why you're surprised. And the response, I'm just really hurt. I'm like, okay. I said, but a big part of your hurt is the disappointment from the expectation of a cat to bark and a dog to meow. This has been the behavior pattern since day one. Why are you tripping?
Yep.
Just like allow yourself to be unaffected by that. Well, they owe me an apology first. I'm like, good luck with that. Let me know how it works out for you. And my family member was determined to hang on to that resentment until they got what they wanted. And I'm like, that's going to be a long wait. Because again, you're expecting a cat to bark and a dog to meow. We've seen the behavior. So if you look at the 4 agreements, right? Don't take anything personally, even when it seems to be directly at you. It has nothing to do with you. It's that person's drama. It's that person's story.
That's a hard one to swallow sometimes, right? Sure. And I think that's a through line that we teach men, and I don't want to derail here, just to add to what you're saying of, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Just need to take a breath on that one because.
And it's, keeping those agreements in place, maintaining the mindset of not taking anything personally is just like forgiveness. It's not one and done. It is an ongoing daily practice.
Yeah.
Daily. Has to be. It has to be a daily practice because just like, we'll consider resentment part of the shadow cadre, right? Shadows, I've said, they are sneaky, they are cunning, they're fucking patient. They will rope-a-dope your ass. You think you got them beat, and then bam, out of nowhere. So resentment is some of the same thing. It's shadow energy. It's negative energy. And you're like, oh, well, I go to church every Sunday, so I don't need to worry about forgiveness. Really? Is that right? Or I meditate, so I don't have to. Really? Just make it a daily practice.
I think just to jump on this, a way that could be applicable, because I see it a lot where we'll be in a situation and notice the person that wants to cut it down right away or find a thing about it that's not working. And some of that comes from just, situational awareness or, seeing the big picture of what's going on. But how many times do you just default to what's negative? How many times do you just default to the thing that's not going to work as the baseline, right? I know I've had to especially coming from New York, like I'm always sort of on edge in a way. And when my family or wife and I are in a situation, whatever it may be, and I'm always looking at like, okay, what could go wrong here? What do I need to pay attention to? What do I need to be aware of? And she'll be like, why don't we focus on how beautifully it's going to work out? Why don't we focus on the things that are working here? And it's like, oh yeah. And just to remind men, the nervous system, our brains, our minds, if you want to call it that, is not designed to make us happy. It's designed to keep us alive, right? So, when we're scanning a room, we're looking for the picture that's tilted on the wall, not the one that's straight. We're looking at what's out of place, right? That's how we're hardwired. Mm-hmm. That's why we always talk about like coming from the mind is not going to make you happy. It'll keep you alive. So you talked about at the beginning of the show here, the gratitude. I think gratitude being the currency of soul, right? I may have said that differently than you.
Soul, yeah.
Right. So it's like you can't have gratitude and resentment at the same time. It doesn't work. They're literally the opposite, right? Gratitude is having reverence for things, right? And believe me, in any situation, you can find what's not working, what doesn't feel comfortable, what you don't like about it. Or you could be in the grace and then see like, wow, that worked out so beautifully and so gracefully and didn't require much effort, right? So I think we keep coming back to the same themes. Like, where are you putting your focus? You talk about intention, attention. You talk about a lot. And it's like, where are we putting that, right? And what is already built up that has to now filter through because we didn't, quote unquote, process that emotion, right? So giving men the skill set to how to do that, and that it's an okay thing to do, right? So I think you have something you want to share on this if you're looking for something.
Put on the old reading glasses. This is an affirmation from that book that I mentioned. All that has offended me, I forgive. Within and without, I forgive. Things past, things present, things future, I forgive. I forgive everything and everybody who can possibly need forgiveness in my past and present. I forgive positively everyone. I am free, and all others are free too. All things are cleared up between us now and forever. How many of us are putting that into practice every day? Very few, right? And a lot of times to let go of resentment, you have to let go of being right.
Oh, we're going there. Good. Okay. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, how many times do we see this with men in our group in relationship where I know you say, do you want to be right or do you want to be in love? Mm-hmm. And okay, you're right. Great. How does that feel?
Yeah.
How's that working?
Exactly.
And it kind of ties into that pointing out things that aren't working, right? Because as men, we just naturally want to fix things. We want to jump into action. All that's great, but it bypasses so much of the experience, and we want to just take care of it because we see the one little thing that could potentially go wrong. And what does that do to the relationship? What does that do to the other person's feelings around themselves, of their abilities, capabilities, and we're shutting them down because we're right.
Right.
So yeah, I'm raising my hand because that's a big one that I've had to put into practice.
And that thing of looking for the one thing that's wrong can really be, destructive and detrimental. Let's say that, you're always having to cook and your woman cooks the meal for you because she wants to do this as a gift for you. And your first comment is, wow, you didn't cook it all the way through, or it needs more salt. Good job, jackass. Yeah. You just insulted the gift. How compelled does she feel to do that for you again? She doesn't. Yeah. Right?
Totally.
So gratitude, and I believe that gratitude requires humility. Right? We have to humble ourselves to say thank you. We have to understand God, universe, source, divine intelligence, whatever. Again, your label is not important to me. Whatever that is the source of all of our good, the source of all in our lives. Not us, You're not the source. A person or circumstance is not the source. So if we can humble ourselves enough to be grateful, right? Think about if you think you're the greatest, baddest, you're the only one. And are you still compelled to say thank you to anybody, or do you feel entitled and deserving? That's not gratitude. Even if you say the words thank you, gratitude is a different energy. There's a humility with gratitude.
Yeah.
A receiving with gratitude, a recognizing that we are receiving from the source of all good. So without going too religious or spiritual on it, resentment is the exact opposite of that. And a lot of times we resent not getting the deal or losing the job or the relationship, whatever it may be. It's an illusion believing that job or person or circumstance is the source of our good. It's not.
Right.
Our good comes
no
from
credit,
something
no
higher.
blame.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't have one and then not the other, right? We have to.
Yeah.
And that's an important point, is that what I'm hearing in this is to not be attached, right? And to not have expectations about how people are supposed to be. Because I know for me, that can set up for a lot of disappointment and a lot of resentment. Like, why didn't you just do it this way? Right. And just to bring it to the macro, and I know we always kind of joke not going down the rabbit hole too big, but like how much resentment for what's going on in the world, what's going on in our political system, our economy, how people are treating each other on social media because they don't like who you're voting for, right? And you don't even know this person, and yet there's all this resentment built up because you wear a certain color hat or you lean a certain way. And it's like, one of the things I love about traveling is when I interact with people, none of that shit matters.
Right.
And it doesn't truly doesn't matter to me. It's what kind of person you are, because all that stuff's made up and bullshit anyway. Right. But it's like, but how much do we hold? My point is, how much do we hold on to that identity of someone because of, again, maybe a political affiliation or a social or economic class or whatever it may be, and we hold on to that. We have judgments. I know I've shared on this podcast and with you, where the story I was told was, oh well, they do bad things because they have a lot of money. It's like, so what stories are then getting perpetuated because of these bullshit resentments?
Right. And it's all divisionary tactics, right? It's like the left resents the right resents the left, black versus white, whatever. And the puppet masters are going, blah, because they're laughing at all of us. And there's that analogy, which is funny. One of the first times I got put in Facebook jail was for this.
You say it so casually.
Well, it's like an achievement, it's a milestone. But if you put black ants and red ants in a jar, they will coexist peacefully, all getting along, everything's fine. And then you shake the jar, they freak out. The black ants think the red ants are attacking them. The red ants think the black ants are attacking them, and they start destroying each other. The question is not which is right, the red or the black. The question is who shook the fucking jar. Facebook banned that one because it was during the time when they were working on division, and that one goes, "Hey, look at the puppet masters, who's pulling the strings." And Facebook goes, "You gotta fact check that. There's no proof that if you put these ants in a jar." I'm like, "Wow, really? Okay." But yeah, it's like all these
ridiculous, right?
What's that?
It gets a bit ridiculous.
It gets ridiculous.
And I say that to say that these little resentments are fucking ridiculous.
Yeah. And now
they really are.
When I see a woman driving in her Prius by herself with the duckbill mask on, still, that's challenging for me to not go, "What is wrong with you?" But it's like, it's her journey. It doesn't affect me. Why am I getting emotionally upset about this woman in her car by herself? Let her stay by herself. I'm not jumping in the passenger seat.
Right.
Unless mentally I do. Because now it's like, oh gosh, so stupid. It's a resentment. It's a judgment, but it's still a form of resentment. And I need to hang on to that story long enough to go tell my friend about it, who's going to side with me. Now we both have some resentment.
Echo chamber.
Right.
Well, I think it was mentioned on the call this last week, at least briefly, if I can remember, but scrolling on Instagram, Facebook, social media, how many different emotional states are we subconsciously processing in 5 minutes of scrolling, right? You may just be going flick, flick, flick and not even really reading what it is, but your brain is picking up every word, every image.
Yeah.
And it has to process that. And how, and this is a reminder to us, a reminder to every man. How many of you are doing that right before bed and right when you wake up? Where in that in between state, when we're the most malleable, most impressionable, the subconscious is most present, are we filling that with fucking crap?
Yeah. And
that
every
builds
man
and
who
breeds resentment.
Yeah, every man who admitted to doing that, look, myself included, we've all done it at least once, made the mistake of grabbing our phone as soon as we wake up. And it's like, maybe it's just to check the time is why the original intention of
Get
grabbing
an alarm clock.
But then we've got, messages, and it's like, oh, I see social media messages, and boom, you're in. Every man who admitted to doing that also admitted that their day went to shit from that moment on, because it's already hijacked your dopamine in your brain. So, yeah, that's the social media thing is a horrible way. But bringing this back to the subject of forgiveness and resentment, man, if you're dealing with low grade anger, I should be doing air quotes when I say that. If you're dealing with low grade anger, if you're dealing with anxiety, if you're dealing with stress, if you're dealing with high blood pressure, I promise you, in fact, I challenge any of you to tell me otherwise, you've got a lot of resentments that you're hanging on to.
Yeah.
On a daily basis.
Anger breeds cancer.
There you go. And heart attacks.
Yep.
So
to kind of go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So you may want to do something to change that. Just a thought.
Well, perfect time in the podcast for that.
Yeah.
Let's get into some actionables here for the men, because again, just even acknowledging that, fuck, I got some forgiveness to do for myself. Let's just start there.
Yeah.
And even if you don't know what it is, just start. One of the most classic things in personal growth is write a letter, right? Just sit down and write a letter to yourself. Maybe it's to the person that you've held on to something. You don't have to send it. You don't have to mail it. You don't have to whatever. But we always talk about pen to paper, nervous system. Write a letter. Get it out. Who do you forgive? Maybe make it part of your morning, daily practice for forgiveness, right?
Yeah. I would actually separate those two things. Write a letter to yourself, right? Because part of the resentments I think most of us are holding is not meeting our own expectations and not meeting the expectations of society. So there's shame around that, and there's resentment around that, and the not good enoughs are on fire from that. So writing a letter of forgiveness to yourself, that's one piece. But as another actionable, you talk about make it part of your daily practice. I would invite you to keep, whether it's a journal or a pen and piece of paper, with you throughout the day, and write down all the little resentments that come into your mind that you realize, right? Like, oh, that person cut me off. Oh, I had to wait in line behind that slow bitch at the bank. Whatever it may be.
Right.
And when you take an inventory at the end of the day and at the end of the week of all of the resentments that you're carrying, it's going to be eye-opening.
Oh, yeah.
And you'll understand why your energy is not where you need it to be to create the life that you want.
Yep. And I would just add, as that's a great practice. I mean, I'm imagining that list would get pretty long pretty quick. Kind of that awareness piece we talk AAA, I think we talked about in the last podcast, right? Where it's like, oh, I need to be aware. What's that?
Several podcasts, I think we mentioned it, but good.
Yeah, I think last one it was pretty prominent, but yeah, it's such a core piece of our teachings because it works, right? And before men, we like to just fix things, right? Let me get to action, through doing. But yet it's like, if you're taking action on the wrong things, it's never going to make the right change. So awareness, take stock, literal note taking of what these resentments are, and then acknowledgement. And part of that acknowledgement could be a letter to yourself, right? That just, and I just want to say, to make sure we say it here, and I really want to say it to every man out there, and I'm going out on a limb here, I know, but you're a good man. And just to know that, yeah, maybe some fucked up things have happened to you. Maybe you've done fucked up things, but at the core of it, you're a good human that went off. And yes, there's those exceptions. You mentioned a few of those earlier in the call, and people that are just not good and evil and do evil things, and they're
Most
really,
people are
really
not
wounded.
psychopaths, sociopaths.
Yeah, but most people,
Most people that
men.
are listening to this podcast are
Right.
not sociopaths.
Right. You're a good man. And you aren't less than because you've done fucked up things. And that's something we've really had to rebuild in a lot of men, where it's like, again, the shame piece of the identity and the story that men take on about themselves because of the behaviors.
Yeah.
And when we get underneath it, we realize, like, hey, that happened to you way back when.
Yeah.
That's not even your stuff. But yet you've created this whole identity around who you are as a result of maybe that one thing that was said or done, or multiple things. And it's like, that's not the truth of who you are.
Yeah.
Right. So what is the truth of who you are? Who are you really?
Right.
Who do you want to be showing up as every single day? What does it really mean to you to walk proudly, to feel like you are able to give, able to express that gratitude that you're talking about?
Mm. If you're building a house of forgiveness, make self-forgiveness the foundation. Make forgiving yourself the foundation. For mistakes that you've made, things that you've done, things that you've said, accomplishes that you've not done, expectations that you've not met, whatever it is, forgive yourself first. Then you can start forgiving others. And the point of that list of resentments is not to go, oh, wow, what a piece of shit I am. No, it's the awareness, the acknowledgement, and then what happens inevitably is we're able to shorten the gap between when we stumbled and when we fell. And we start catching the resentment before we stumble. It's like, there it is. There it is. Now we have awareness of it before it happens. And we're able to keep ourselves in a state of forgiveness.
Yeah. And I imagine if you practice that list each week, because you catch it sooner, that list is just going to get shorter and shorter and shorter. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that's a beautiful way to end this episode.
There you go.
Self-forgiveness. Got some great things, tools to implement right away. And you're a good man.
Yeah.
Remember that.
Now, some of you are listening to this podcast. Some of you are watching this on YouTube. So for those of you that are watching, Michael, show us Hawaii.
Yeah, I hope we get something good here. I don't know what we're going to get.
If it's a cloudy day, it's going to be horrible.
Oh, yeah, you don't get anything because it's there it is.
There you go.
Somewhere out there.
You got a little bit. You got a couple palm trees. He's not in California, I promise. He's in Hawaii.
No, I am.
Can't see the beach that well.
So beautiful downloads and shares today. We like to bring you men the raw and the real of what's going on in our group and what men are working through that are just a little bit further ahead in this work. So we're going to continue to share that and bring that to you and take these things in and do the action items, because it will transform your life. And as Russell said, if you're watching this on YouTube, like, subscribe, share it, share this message far and wide with other men. This is how we get the work out there. So with that,